In this lesson, we're going to pursue the theme of what web services are good for. So I'm going to provide an example of task automation. I'm going to talk a little bit about Java-based data retrieval from a browser and software system integration. You see those three items listed in one of my working files. It's called y.txt, and you're seeing it in my Emacs editor. So let me start with the task automation, and let me bring up another working file that summarizes that. This file is called erp.txt, and what I'm going to describe is something that's probably familiar to you from your work. So suppose we have a company, we need inventory items, perhaps we do manufacturing. You could manage the inventory, of course, interactively. You could have a human look at it regularly and control it, but you can also get very strong programmatic control nowadays using so-called ERP systems, in particular, the inventory control subsystem of such a system. So I'm thinking of something pretty straightforward. I have a program that monitors my database. When inventory levels fall below a particular threshold, that program cranks up a web service client, which goes against the web services that vendors provide. So basically, the selection of the appropriate inventory items, the placing and tracking of orders, all of that good stuff can be done automatically. This is a wonderful use of web services because it just fits in so naturally. Once again, the web service is piggybacking off of existing infrastructure. There's no fancy programming required. It's fairly straightforward. Let me return to my little list and look quickly at the second item. I don't have a nice, concise phrase to describe this, so what I'd like to do instead is show you a couple of examples. So first, let me bring up another working file. I call this yahoo.txt. Let me explain how I got this. I simply visited the Yahoo website and then did view source to get the HTML page, and I extracted some arbitrary JavaScript. The JavaScript itself is of no particular interest to us. This does a little bit of cookie tracking. We don't care about that so much. The point of interest is that virtually every HTML page nowadays has embedded JavaScript, and that's the theme that I'd like to pursue. So what I want to show you now is a website. Let me come up here and enter Meteor.com. Meteor is a bleeding edge web framework. It's gotten quite a bit of buzz over the past year or so. If you look at this web page, it looks fairly conventional. What I'm going to do now is go back and look at some of the code under the hood. So to that end, I'm going to bring up another working file, meteor.txt, and I'm going to move down here. As you can see, it's a HTML document. I'm going to move down here to the bottom and highlight this part. Notice that the body of the HTML document is completely empty. There's nothing in there. This is typical for any Meteor web page. The magic of Meteor occurs up here. So you see here a link to some JavaScript. When this page is loaded into the browser downloads this JavaScript. This JavaScript then builds the so-called DOM, the data structure that the browser displays in a window. It builds that DOM in place. And in the course of building the DOM, this JavaScript goes off to a web server, or perhaps web servers, to download data. In that capacity, the JavaScript is acting as a web service client. This is becoming increasingly popular in website design. The use of JavaScript embedded in the HTML page and acting as a web service client. We'll be spending quite a bit of time on this particular theme. Let me return one last time to y.txt, our overview, and I want to talk a little bit about software system integration. I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint slide in just a moment, but first let me make two general points about web services. An attractive feature of web services is that they're language neutral. You can write a web service in one language, you can consume the web service in a completely different language. Web services are also inherently platform independent. It doesn't matter whether you're working on a Windows platform. Web services effectively blur platform and language distinctions. So it's nice. I can write a web service in whatever language I'm most comfortable with. You can write a client against that service in whatever language you're most comfortable with. So what I've depicted here on the right is a legacy database system. The database system isn't so important. This might be a COBOL program, a Fortran program, a C++ program, whatever sort of program is of interest to us. And it's been front-ended as a web service. And then on the left, you see clients making calls against the web service in order to talk to the back-end system. Now, where does the need for this sort of thing arise? Well, it's very familiar in our business. You have a company with its information systems. It acquires another company with different information systems. As you can imagine, the management says, we need those systems to be integrated yesterday. We can't afford to rewrite those systems. What's a quick and relatively pain-free way to achieve systems integration? So what we've looked at is task automation. We did that in an earlier example with Amazon. Today we talked a little bit about inventory control, JavaScript and web services, a theme we'll pursue at some length at the code level, and software system integration. 3 natural and fairly straightforward uses of web services.